Alright, check. Tenet. Tenant. I always want to say tenant, but it's Tenet. Directed by Christopher Nolan. Directed and written by Christopher Nolan, I should say. Not gonna lie, I've been on a roller coaster of emotions with this Christopher Nolan guy. At first I liked him. Inception. Obviously a great movie. Dark Knight. Then I kind of lost touch and I kind of started to begrudge him. And then I realized that the problem all along wasn't really Christopher Nolan. It was more of the miscategorization of Christopher Nolan. So people all over the internet like to compare Christopher Nolan to Stanley Kubrick, saying that he's our generation's Stanley Kubrick, which is partially or probably fully the reason why I started to resent watching a Christopher Nolan film. But I realized that that was kind of unfair. Christopher Nolan is not Stanley Kubrick, nor do I think that it's a valid comparison. When you watch Stanley Kubrick's movies, they're vastly, vastly, vastly different from when you watch a Christopher Nolan movie. Look, Stanley Kubrick, legendary filmmaker, the dude was just on another level completely, and I think that's what people fail to realize. When you look at famous painters, you have Dali. Stanley Kubrick is like the Dali when it comes to film. So to put Christopher Nolan on such a high pedestal, at least this early in his career, I think is an unfair thing to do, and I think that's what the internet has been doing. Christopher Nolan is a very, very solid filmmaker, don't get me wrong, but he operates more when it comes to spectacle. If I had to compare him to another filmmaker, he comes across more as like a James Cameron than a Stanley Kubrick. Every decision he does, whether it's the characters, the dialogue, everything he does is in service of the spectacle of the film, and everything is in service of the concept of the film, which isn't a bad thing, it's just different from what Stanley Kubrick did, hence the reason why I compare him more to a James Cameron. He reminds me a lot of James Cameron. James Cameron, when you look back at some of his movies, are the characters the best? No. Is the plot line like something that makes you scratch your head and it's something that makes you think for weeks? No, it's not. I think Christopher Nolan works the same way. So, I started watching this movie and I had read a couple of reviews before going in. Fans and critics alike are a little mixed on this one as compared to previous Christopher Nolan films. Obviously, people loved Dunkirk. It was nominated for an Oscar. And you look back at his filmography, movies like Inception and Dark Knight are hailed as modern classics. This wasn't the kind of review that Tenet was getting. A little more mixed. Mixed to positive, I would say, but mixed nonetheless. So, what is this movie about? It's basically a heist/James Bond espionage film with some sci-fi elements thrown in with a hint of fucking time travel. It's basically Christopher Nolan's response to not directing a James Bond film. He was like, oh yeah, well I'm gonna make my own James Bond. And he threw in some sci-fi in there as well, just like he did in movies like Inception. Obviously the plot is a lot more dense and a lot more thick than that. Unfortunately, I don't know what the fuck happened in this movie. No, I have some, basically loose idea of what was happening in the film. Am I able to explain the plot to the camera? Fuck no. But I have some ideas to what was going on. I wasn't completely lost, although I was pretty close to that point, not gonna lie. At first, I was trying to understand every single detail of this movie, because my friend Jacky, who edits these videos, told me that, hey, you're not going to understand a thing about this movie. And I kind of wanted to prove Jacky wrong. I wanted to be like, oh yeah, I fucking understand this shit. I didn't understand, but when it came to a certain point in the film, I remembered a quote from one of the characters in this film. She said, "Don't try to understand it, feel it." She was talking about the time travel element within the film, but some part of me makes me think that that line was a little meant for the audience as well. Made me think of Austin Powers when Basil Expedition tries to explain to Austin Powers the intricacies of time travel and just turns to the camera and says, "Just enjoy the film." That's a bit the vibe I got from that line. I'm having a tough time evaluating this film, and I'm having a tough time understanding why people who were a fan of Christopher Nolan's previous films aren't quite budging with this one as much. The criticisms I see of the movie are stuff like the protagonist is a little weak, which if you look back at Dunkirk, the protagonist in that film isn't really fleshed out as well. And I'll arguably say, if you look back at something like The Prestige, it's not like you walk out of that movie saying like, oh, Christian Bale's character was so deep. It's not like that. I think people are just starting to have a little Christopher Nolan fatigue because the flaws you see in his previous films are just reoccurring and people are just coming to expect the next Christopher Nolan movie. I saw a review of this film called this movie a parody of Christopher Nolan movies, which makes me understand that there is kind of a fatigue with that Christopher Nolan style. However, did I like this movie? I enjoyed this movie quite a bit, I'm not gonna lie. I think this is a solid movie. Again, did I understand the movie 100%? No. But I had some through line of what was going on, and at the end of the day, I thought it was an overall enjoyable experience. So I'm going to start with the positives here. The first thing I noticed about this movie was the combat significantly improved when it comes to Christopher Nolan. So if you look back at Christopher Nolan's catalog, you look at a movie like Batman Begins, the hand-to-hand combat in that, I'm not going to lie, it's pretty bad. Like, there's a lot of shaky cam. Batman always does the same move, which is like punch, then hit him with the little scratchy things on his fucking arms. Always that move. But here, the fucking hand-to-hand combat is crazy. It's unlike anything I've ever seen, and that means a lot coming from me because I tend to like movies like Jackie Chan films and even more recent Asian martial art films. For me to say that this movie, an American movie, had a really good hand-to-hand combat, it's a really good compliment. The camera trickery in these scenes is unlike anything I've ever seen before. You have one person fighting forward in time while the other person is fighting backwards in time. And then later in the film, it shows you the perspective of the other character, and it's like the whole scene is reversed around. I really can't do it any justice just explaining it here, but it really is something to marvel at. And I can say the same with the car chases in here. The car chases, just like the hand-to-hand combat, it shows you both perspectives going forward and backwards in time. And I thought that was really cool. And it's some of the best action I've ever seen, even in a Christopher Nolan film. I think the action in this is ridiculously awesome. It's unlike anything I've ever seen. The music, as always, is done by Hans Zimmer. He's done basically every one of Christopher Nolan's films at this point, except probably his earlier ones. So here I am, studying cystic fibrosis. I had my cystic fibrosis notes here, right here. Only to get a text by Jacky, who says, "Not Hans Zimmer this time around. Some guy called Ludwig Göransson." I thought for sure it was Hans Zimmer that did this soundtrack, but I was wrong. It's this Ludwig person. Needless to say, the soundtrack really did sound like Hans Zimmer. This is why Jacky is the best editor ever. Because not only is he an editor, he's a fact checker too. This Jacky is amazing. I was worried that he would fall on his old tropes, the bombs and the big loud noises. I feel like Hans Zimmer recently has resorted to doing that because that's what his trademark is. But in this film, he manages to pull something different. The soundtrack at times kind of feels like a record going in reverse. I wouldn't be surprised if Hans Zimmer wrote a melody and then tried to reverse it and it made a different melody and played around with that. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. However, the end credits soundtrack didn't really fit with Christopher Nolan. Christopher Nolan's a bit of a boring British dude. So when you try to pair him up with a hip rapper, it doesn't really mesh. But that's like, I don't even count that as a criticism. That's the end credits of the film, so whatever. The problems I have with this film are problems I have with Christopher Nolan as a whole. Just like I was talking about when talking about the end credits song, Christopher Nolan is a pretty dry individual. And I feel like that's the main thing that's keeping him away from being like a Stanley Kubrick. He lacks a lot of emotion, and when he's done emotional moments in his past films, it's always kind of fallen flat to me. If you look at the romantic aspect of Interstellar, doesn't really work. Even if you look at something like Inception, the relationship between Leonardo DiCaprio's character and Marion Cotillard's character, it's really dry and there lacks a certain emotion to it. It kind of feels like an alien is observing human behavior and trying to imitate it. That's a little harsh, I know. But this movie especially is very, very dry. Christopher Nolan is the type of guy who's walking in the street and will witness a car crash. And if I saw a car crash in the street, I'd be like, oh, fuck! But Christopher Nolan would just be like, all right, it's good. Oh, it's pretty good. Oh, yeah. So yeah, this movie especially, I felt the lack of a certain charisma or emotion. Because this movie is obviously paying homage to these globe-trotting James Bond type films and stuff like Jason Bourne and stuff like Mission Impossible. Christopher Nolan wanted to make his own franchise like that. But it lacks that solid lead. When I watch Mission Impossible, I want to see Tom Cruise because Tom Cruise is so lovable in those films. And James Bond, obviously, he's suave, he's smooth. Men want to be him and women want to be with him. That's how James Bond goes. That Christopher Nolan dryness, however, made me kind of not attached to the main performance of this film. And that's not a knock on the main actor. I forget what his name is, something Washington, because he's Denzel's son. But I've seen him previously in BlacKkKlansman, and he was very good in that film. So I don't think the problem is with him. It's more like he isn't given much to do. And even when he is given a funny line, the humor in this is just so dry and forced that it just lacks that suave tone that a James Bond would have. And it doesn't help that Nolan is the sole writer of this film. So usually he's paired up with Jonathan Nolan, his brother, except for Dunkirk and this film. And those two films alike had very, very dry characters. Another complaint I had with the film is that the film is complex, yes, it is. It's very complex. However, the rules of this film are not really well defined. And when the rules of a film, especially like a sci-fi action film, when the rules aren't well defined, it's hard for you to give a shit about the stakes. Because in my head the whole time, I'm like, wait, so couldn't they just like rewind time and like prevent the explosion from happening and redo it over and over until it works? Maybe there's some explanation. I'm pretty sure there is an explanation for why you can't do that. However, the rules of this aren't well defined. I wrote in my notes, compared to Crank. I never thought I'd compare a Nolan movie to Crank starring Jason Statham. But when you look at a movie like Crank, it's an action film, it's stupid, sure, but the rules in that are well defined. Jason Statham's character, if his heart rate falls below a certain level, he's gonna die. Easy to understand, so you know that if you see Jason Statham taking a breather on a bench, that's like an intense scene for the audience. It's like an edge of your seat scene. And even if you look at a movie like Upgrade is another movie that does a good job at explaining the rules of this machine that's in the guy's brain. With this, however, the rules aren't well explained. So when there is that scene where you should be on the edge of your seat, I wasn't really there. It could be me. It could be because of my lack of understanding of the film. Whatever. I feel like the movie could have done a better job at just focusing the rules, and that way the drama and the intense scenes are even more intense. Look, Christopher Nolan, I just want to talk to you mano a mano here. I think you're a talented dude. I'm sure you're watching this video right now. I want you to work a little outside of your comfort zone. I love seeing you do sci-fi. I'm one of the few people who think that Interstellar is a really, really good movie. Some critics don't really think that. I'm opposed. I think it's a fun movie. That said, I want you to work outside your comfort zone. I don't want you to rely on the same tricks anymore. Take it down a notch. Maybe do something like more emotional. And if you don't have that emotional side to you, pair yourself up with someone who does have that emotional side to them. I would love to see Christopher Nolan try his hand at something like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. That, yes, it's a sci-fi film, but there's an emotional core to it, and I feel like that's why that movie is basically a modern classic. I feel like Christopher Nolan should surround himself with people who can offer a more emotional side to his story, and that way he can make a more emotional film without it feeling very dry. But that aside, look, is it repetitive? Is it stuff we've seen Christopher Nolan do already? Yes, it is. If you're going into this film expecting a whole different side to Christopher Nolan, this isn't the one. However, I can acknowledge this is a solid film, and I can actually see this film gaining a cult following later on. I'm sure there's a bunch of subreddits right now that's analyzing the film. Oh, in this scene, it's a parallel to this scene. And I'm sure there's like 20 videos on YouTube titled 30 Things You Didn't Understand in Tenet. There's going to be a lot of talking surrounding the movie, which is awesome. When you make a film, you want your audience to dissect the shit out of it and share their interpretations, so that's a good thing, and that's why I think this film can gain a cult following. It's just a little bit of the same Nolan shtick. I want to give props to one person who was on the set of this film. I don't know their name, but whoever is the continuity supervisor, can we give this person a gold star and an Academy Award? Because whoever's the continuity supervisor of this film probably needed a fucking PhD in astro and quantum mechanics and physics and all that fucking shit. Props to you, continuity supervisor. You're an unsung hero of Tenet. But overall thoughts, decent movie. I would give this like a 6 or 7 out of 10, something like that. I will revisit this film in the future, and my grade will probably get better as I give it repeat viewings. But it's unfortunately a Christopher Nolan film, more of the same.
Tenet. In cinemas now.